T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start. We have...
From its first flight in 1981 till its final landing in 2011, the Space Shuttle was the backbone of the American space program. Built upon the experience gained from Apollo, and with the goal of making a reusable spacecraft, NASA accomplished a feat that most thought was impossible. 5 complete shuttle systems were built and completed 135 missions to low Earth orbit. They conducted science experiments, deployed and fixed the Hubble Space Telescope, and helped to build the International Space Station, which is in healthy operation still. Using Kerbal Space Program, we'll take a deep dive into each mission, looking at the crew, payload, and mission objectives. Join us on this walk through history. And hey, you just might learn something. I'm Sears JT, and this is Project STS. Alright, STS-3. Space Shuttle Columbia, surprise, surprise. You're going to be seeing a lot of Columbia in the early missions. Launched on March 30th, 1982, at 11 a.m. Eastern, approximately 4 months after STS-2. So we went from 1 to 2 being 7 months, 2 to 3 being about 4 months. So they're cutting down the refurbish time, which is not as surprising just because they didn't have as many tiles to refurbish after STS-2, and they probably didn't have as much data they needed to crunch from the DFI this time. Yeah, we'll do like we did last time. We'll close up payload bay. I'll talk more about the payload as we get up into orbit, and then we'll talk about the crew as we're on our way up. Let's roll this thing out to the pad, and I did it again. So the crew for this mission, 2 again, which we'll have one more mission of two astronauts, and then they'll start increasing the amount. For this mission, it is Jack Lousma. I'm probably not saying that correctly, as the commander, and the pilot is Charles Fullerton. Okay, so we have the correct crew in the STS-3. Let's roll it back out to the pad. And I'll talk about Jack and Charles as it's on its way up. You'll notice this one too. We're to the orange tank. Well, kind of. As close to the orange tank as we can get Kerbal. But yeah, they shed that 600 pounds roughly of paint, and now we're to the orange tank. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff of STS-3. Okay. I went a little bit too far on that. We're okay. Anyway, so we're on our way up. We'll talk about Jack first. He was a member of the second crew of Skylab, so this is actually his second space flight on STS-3. His crew on Skylab was a name you might know as Alan Bean, and the other crew member was Owen Garriott. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Fullerton, on the other hand... Oh, actually, back to Jack, sorry. STS-3, since it was only his second time, but it was also his last time into space. After STS-3, he became a politician not long after, serving in the Senate, I believe. Charles was it's kind of a cool guy, actually, when I read up on him. He was a NASA research pilot for a while, flying some of the NASA B-52s, which, you know what NASA used B-52s for, it was for the X-15s. So, like, the beginning of, not Apollo 11. First Man, sorry, movie, where he's flying the X-15, and he releases from the B-52. Charles flew those B-52s, which is freaking cool. And after the B-52s, he was a part of the ALT tests for the shuttle with Shuttle Enterprise. The approach and landing test. He sat next to another name you might recognize, Fred Hayes from Apollo 13, to do the ALTs. I believe he flew the 747 shuttle carrier a few times as well. He also served as support crew, or astronaut support crew on Apollo 14, 15, 16, 17. So, it's his first time into space, and Lousma's second. So a lot of rookies flying on these early shuttle missions. So since we got through the crew, talk about the support staff, which we actually mentioned one before. Brewster H. Shaw, he served as one of the Capcoms on this mission, along with Terry Hart, who was the Ascent Capcom, Stephen Nagel, Reentry Capcom, and then George D. Nelson, Sally K. Ride, and David Walker were all support crew. All those names I just said will fly on future shuttle missions, so we'll be talking about all of them later. Okay. ET-SEP confirm. Oops. Okay. That's a much better ET-SEP. Let's get away from the thing. Okay. OMSs are prepared for circularization. I also know that this is not entirely how the shuttle would get to orbit. It wouldn't do the OMS burn this late, but it's the way I know how to do it, so I'm gonna stick to it. 5 seconds for OMS burn. 3 or 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, mark. Alright, so now that we've reached a stable orbit, I'll go ahead and pop open the payload bay and we'll talk about what we got in here. So, obviously, Canadarm. Can't forget about your friendly neighborhood Canadarm. We'll talk about that once we get into the other payloads as well. One interesting thing that STS-3 did was it did a lot of thermal testing on the shuttle bay doors, and I guess the orbiter itself too, where it would like do various maneuvers like pointing itself at the sun, seeing what effect it would have on the doors, and then rolling back towards away from the sun. One thing they noticed that the bay doors would warp, and they actually warped, I think, less than they figured it would, but it would warp enough where they wouldn't shut cleanly. So that was one of the things they wanted to test, to see how much warping happens and if they could fix it if they had to, which they could if they, turned away from the sun and the doors unwarped, and then they were able to shut just fine. So that's kind of a neat experiment, and it's a good thing that they were able to get them back closed again. Also, you'll recognize the DFI. This one also flew with the DFI. Does all the same sensors for doing stresses on launch, reentry, and all that kind of stuff. What material were the doors made from? That's a good question, Grav. I am not entirely sure. I know that... Did they do that from the start where they had thermal protections on the door, on the interior of the door itself? I don't know if they had that on every mission, or is that something they added later due to the results of these tests? I assume, Grav, you're talking about the well, I mean, I guess it's metal, right? Because it's thin enough that I think the heat affected it, and due to the curvature, it just kind of did this, The doors are constructed of graphite epoxy composite material, which reduces the weight by 20% over that aluminum honeycomb. Oh, aluminum. I could see aluminum doing that, yeah. Direction of approximately 900 pounds brings the weight of the doors down to approximately 3,200 pounds. Dang. Over 1.5 tons. Largest aerospace structure to be constructed from composite material. Well, that kind of graphite epoxy composite with an aluminum honeycomb sandwich. Doors are made of subassemblies consisting of Oh, wait. Oh, is that the same thing? Oh, no, this is different. Okay. Epoxy honeycomb sandwich panels. Solid graphite epoxy laminate frames. Expansion joint frames. Or pots sealed. Okay. Aluminum mesh wire bonded to the outer skin. Dude, man, they thought of everything. They thought of freaking anything. Oh, yeah, I actually got that same page, but you read it quicker than I did. Okay, I'm going to save this. So yeah, on top of the DFI, which I'll just mention, we've mentioned the DFI enough that you guys kind of understand that. Excuse me. It also had the OSSI, which was from the NASA Office of Space Science and Applications, which is a mouthful, but it was just a number of instruments meant to measure like the pollutants that the orbiter caused, like from its RCS firing, any extra gases that were in the payload bay that got exerted when they opened it, any residuals coming out of the OMSs or the SSMEs. It was just supposed to measure like what contaminants what was around the orbiter. And we'll talk about the where is it? Plasma Diagnostics Package, the PDP, which is this guy here. They put on the end of the Canadarm, and they kind of moved it around to try to do measurements of stuff in various spots around the orbiter. So we'll go ahead and try that at some point as well. Okay, so yeah, on top of the OSSI, there was also, which I kind of modeled here with these mystery goos, were two test containers for what's called the Getaway Special. It was a program offered by NASA for outside agencies to fly small experiments up on the Space Shuttle. They were pretty small containers. I mean, I think they just put whatever experiments you want inside of them. So there were two tests of those that NASA put in there. But we'll talk later. That program was eventually discontinued. I believe after Columbia, after the Columbia disaster. But I'm trying. Did I write that down? I didn't. But the Getaway program was eventually stopped. And on top of what's in the payload bay, there are numerous just normal experiments in the shuttle's middeck. It was the first time that outside agencies flew up experiments on the middeck. Some of them were like insect motion tests, and a couple of like other medical type things. I think one of them was trying to grow latex particles up in space. I think that was one of the tests on the middeck. So kind of smaller experiments that didn't really belong in the payload bay, they had in the middeck. Okay, so there's other notes that I have that are kind of funny, but we're gonna test the PDP first. See if I can grab it, and alright, PDP grasps. Alright. And like I said before, the purpose of the PDP, or the, I can bring up the name again in my notes, the Plasma Diagnostics Package, which, kind of a cool name, but I feel like they can come up with something in the package, but it was just meant to, they kind of moved it around the orbiter, took some measurements of contaminants and whatnot that the orbiter caused. You're going, oh, I went up to 9. Whoops. Went a little high on that. It's alright. Trying to think. I talked about the thermal testing. I talked about the DFI, the OSS instruments. That's what the PDP is kind of part of. The experiments in the middeck. Talked about all that. Okay, Canadarm is backstowed. Perfect. Alright. Let's lock her up. Bring her in. The music to that movie is so good. Okay, so I'm gonna get a maneuver note in here for coming back. But before I do that, so most shuttle missions landed at Edwards. I can't talk right now. In California, because due to the orbits, it kind of made sense, right? But STS-3 couldn't land at Edwards because it got flooded. And so they had to land at White Sands, New Mexico instead, which was actually the only shuttle to land at White Sands. They, Jack and Charles also preferred landing at White Sands because that's where they trained. So they kind of knew the area and it made sense to land there. But because of landing there, all the dust and everything, it actually took a little bit longer to refurbish Columbia for its next mission because of all the dust. They were commenting like the dust got everywhere on the orbiter. So I could try and land at the desert, but that's gonna be one heck of an inclination change. The inclination change is commencing. And for those wondering, yes, I know I could lock to the maneuver node, but due to the way the OMSs are positioned, the maneuver node likes to freak out, and then the shuttle starts tumbling. So, I figured I will do it manually just so that it doesn't start tumbling with the maneuver node. Well, if I do get on the runway, it's technically not in kind of the same area as White Sands, but that's alright. So while this is deorbiting, I wanted to touch on a couple other things from my notes here. So, while in orbit, they did encounter a few issues on STS-3. The one big issue they ran into was the toilet malfunctioned on the first use. So, I guess Lousma quoted as saying there's 8 days of colorful flushing. So whatever that meant, yeah, the toilet kind of didn't work for a little bit. An APU overheated in orbit. That's what we call young Air Force base inside the RP. Yeah, exactly. And the APU overheated, but worked fine for re-entry. And both the crew members experienced space sickness, which I'm sure is not fun to deal with at all. I did mention before that it was flown... Oh no, that was STS-2, but this one was flown mostly by autopilot. But the autopilot for landing wasn't quite done yet, so they still landed manually, but autopilot was used for re-entry. We talked about the landing site being changed. We're doing that, and Charles flew, like I said, he had to do it manually, the landing, and he kind of went a little aggressive on the landing, to the point where he was coming in a little fast, and he didn't get the landing gear out until, well, they weren't locked until 5 seconds before touchdown, which is coming in hot, I guess you could say. But other than that, all mission objectives were accomplished on this mission, other than the issues they ran into, but it didn't affect the mission at all. Yeah, I guess the PDP stuff all went fine. All the mid-deck experiments, they nailed. So overall, STS-3 was a good mission. Let's hope I can finish it out on the same note. Okay, so yeah, we're definitely gonna overshoot, but that's perfectly fine. I'm gonna pitch up a little bit more. Oops, sorry, I just hit my mic. Oh, and it's causing me to lose control a little bit. I'm not hitting my mic on purpose, I promise. It's north-south, yeah, I somehow spaced on that. Yeah, we overshot by a decent amount. I'm also not helping the situation here. I think I started turning a little too early. Let's get down. Alright, pretend we're landing at White Sands. I promise I will nail one of these landings at some point. Heavy trajectories I think will help. My angle attack, I think if I kept it at 30... I don't know. I missed by a lot. Alright. I'm landing some gypsum dust. Make sure I get past these hills, though. Don't know if that's going to be possible. These foothills down here might be a little rocky. Flies real nice when you're at like 200 to 150 meters per second. Flies really smooth. 800 meters. Alright. 400 meters. Gear down. Flaring. 10, 9. Touchdown. We're bouncing. Shoot out. Brakes. Brakes. I don't want to brake too hard in case weird things happen. And touchdown. Well, we're some distance away from our goal, but still landed in the desert, just like STS-3. So I'll consider that close enough. Thank you, New Pro. Thank you, solid. And that's STS-3.